The college football world is getting smaller, and while it's pretty obvious we're moving towards a smaller top tier of the sport, it's not exactly clear who's going to be in that tier and how much smaller it'll be. As the changes are getting closer, there's quite a few teams that are trying to get on the boat before it leaves the shore, and there's also quite a few teams that are maybe already on the boat that don't deserve their seat. So to figure it out, I've put together a series of tests to see in the most scientific way possible what the new age of college football should look like, free of any preconceived notions and prior engagements from the past ages of college football. A lesser man than I probably would look at playoff success or maybe all-time success for a program, including the BCS and newspaper poll eras, but I don't think that the powers that are moving college football towards whatever we're going towards care as much about winning and history as they do fan engagement, aka viewership, aka money in their pocket. And I want to be clear that, as I've said many times before, I don't think that shrinking the sport is good for college football. But I do want to see who the true power players are of the sport in the eyes of the people. So that if we do have to watch this thing shrink into something different, at least we get a version that the public has in theory voted for with their time and money, instead of something that comes together from backroom dealings between schools and conferences and TV networks and sponsors, whoever else has their fingers in the cake at this point. So for these tests, I think that the best starting point is to look at teams with a stadium capacity of at least 50,000 people. To me, that says that there are enough people that want to go see this team play that on any given game day, the stadium will be holding the biggest event in the area and in most cases in the entire state for that day. It actually turns out that there are 62 teams with a stadium capacity of 50,000 or more in the entirety of FBS, and you can see those teams on the screen now. There are a few asterisks that I do want to point out as we look at this. Temple, Pitt, South Florida, Miami, and UNLV all play in stadiums that are also used by the NFL team from their city, so they weren't necessarily built with their team's fan base or capacity needs in mind. UTSA is also in that boat. They're in a stadium that was built for an NFL team, the Alamo Dome, but the NFL team just never came. But it's not a total loss for San Antonio, as this upcoming weekend, the Final Four will be there for the 5th time since they built the stadium in the 90s, I think. So even though that first test takes out over half of what's currently in FBS, I personally don't think that whoever is the captain or captains or pack of first mates fighting for power in lieu of a captain that's running this college football boat, if we're sticking from the analogy from earlier, is taking 62 teams into the top division of college football. So I think that the next test that is more important than stadium capacity or anything that has to do with game days in those towns is TV numbers. Ultimately, TV ratings are what's driving the conversation and the changes that we're seeing in college football right now with playoff expansion and conference realignment. So for our next test, I scoured the internet and found this guy, Zach Miller, who's working on this site called The Medium, and he's put together average TV ratings for college football for each year going back like 10 years at this point. And just kind of glancing at the numbers over the past couple years, it looked like any team that averaged 1 million viewers per game over an entire season was relevant on the national stage for that given season. So I compiled the list of all the teams that averaged 1 million viewers per game in a season over the past 4 years and came up with 26 teams of our original 62 that averaged 1 million viewers in each of the past 4 seasons. You see that list here, and it's most of the names that you would suspect at the top of college football, the top of the national conversation, and there's maybe a few surprises. Indiana, who obviously was in that conversation last year, but was like not a bowl eligible team before that. They were still relevant to their fans. UCLA, who always sucks. Oklahoma State, who kind of had some good years but sucked last year. They were all 1 million plus every season in the past 4 seasons. And so these 26 have cemented their spot in the top division of college football because with these numbers, it's obvious that they have both local and national relevance, and they offer something to college football that can't easily be replaced by any other school. So we could stop there. We could say that the top division of college football is 26 teams, but that would be smaller than all the top leagues in the US. That'd be smaller than the NBA, the NFL, MLB, NHL, MLS, you name it. At that point, really, you're talking about a WNBA-sized league, and they're basically just marketing a race war to get views at this point. So let's keep expanding so we can avoid those same pitfalls. Now, of our original 62, there are 20 teams that have at least one season where they averaged at least 1 million viewers per game, but weren't a part of the 26 that we just pulled together. But I don't think it's enough to just have one season that you average a million viewers per game. Because it could be that you just had a great season. One great season in four doesn't make you a blue blood, doesn't make you the top of college football. Or you could have a couple games against really popular teams that just pull your average up, but really nobody cared about you. They just cared about the better team in the game. So I took it one step further. Of the 20 teams that we had in that list, 13 averaged at least a million viewers per game over the past four seasons combined. So maybe they had one or two down seasons, but over the 4 years that we're looking at, they, for the most part, or overall average a million viewers per game. Then we're looking at a 39 team top division. And it's a good number. I think that's, you want it to be a little bit bigger than the other leagues, but I think that 40 makes more sense just from a rounding perspective. So let's look at the 7 teams remaining and figure out who most deserves to be the last one on the top boat. So first things first, let's get rid of Louisville and UNC because both teams didn't even average 900,000 viewers over the past 4 seasons. Next, we're going to look at Kansas, who has had 2 straight seasons over a million average viewers, but they're currently renovating their stadium, and they're actually going to lose a couple thousand seats in the renovation, and they're going to drop under the 50,000 benchmark that we have for our original 62. They were the smallest stadium in our original 62, so unfortunately, they don't meet the qualifications after this renovation, which will be done before next season, so they are out. That leaves us with West Virginia, Missouri, Georgia Tech, and Mississippi State. Now, Georgia Tech actually averaged the most viewers over the 4 seasons at 990,000. But there's a huge gap between what they did last season in 2024, which averaged 1.89 million viewers, and 2021, which was down at 459,000 viewers. And you have to imagine that the 8 overtime game against Georgia, which averaged 8.5 million viewers, is really skewing those numbers for 2024. And that's not to mention that they played ACC powerhouses Miami and Florida State, and they also played Notre Dame this last season. So how much really is Georgia Tech bringing to the table versus them just playing high-quality opponents? I mean, 3 of those teams are in our 26, and then Miami is also in the 13, so they're going to be out. The same could be said for Mississippi State and Missouri, who really benefit from being in the SEC. But Mississippi State didn't have a season under 799,000 viewers, while Missouri had a 462,000 viewer season in 2021. So let's just take out both Georgia Tech and Missouri. I think that neither of them are carrying enough of their own water to bring something unique to the league. I think they're always going to be the lowest viewed opponents, and they're not bringing any additional viewers into the league. They're just carrying on with the SEC and making money off of being in the SEC. Well, and the ACC in Georgia Tech's case. That just leaves Mississippi State and West Virginia as the 2 final teams fighting for that last spot in the top 40. And they're 2 very similar teams in terms of stadium size and average viewership over the last 4 seasons. But West Virginia has to be the winner. And this past year is really the tiebreaker because although Mississippi State did average about 3,000 more viewers per game than West Virginia, they did that with an SEC schedule, while West Virginia did that in the recently dismantled Big 12, who only has 5 other teams in the top league, while the SEC has 13. And this is not to be biased against the SEC, as I'm known to be, and openly am biased against the SEC. I'm working on it. But, I mean, come on, sue me. Really what we're saying here is West Virginia is bringing more of their own fans to the table, while Mississippi State is really getting a lot of help from their conference, who has a lot of the top teams as far as viewership and stadium size in the country. So there you have it. Our league is set with the 40 teams for our top division. Now let's go ahead and split them into 4 different conferences and talk about how this league can work. Here are the 4 conferences: North, South, East, and West. And those are more names than actual directions because there are some weird ones here, right? South Carolina is in the South while Georgia is in the East, even though South Carolina is more East than Georgia and Georgia is more South than South Carolina. Or the Oklahoma schools are in the West, while Kansas State and Iowa State are in the South, even though Oklahoma is more South than both Kansas and Iowa. But with a purely geographic setup, the South is packed with all of the teams that are kind of the biggest draws for TV and stadiums. I mean, the Big Ten has some big stadiums as well. But that kind of messes up a core idea, which is to standardize the setup a bit. The imbalances in conferences is what has pushed a big push in all these changes in the first place. The SEC and the Big Ten have been so imbalanced, and they're pulling more and more teams out to be even more imbalanced. So we really need to isolate this new league from having these conferences kind of work in their own favor, work for their own benefit, instead of keeping the league together. As far as how the conferences themselves will work, this is where I think what college football is currently doing, for the most part, is what we're going to do. It's the best setup. Each team will play 9 conference games, so they'll play every other team in the conference, and they'll play 3 non-conference games. And there will be the ability to have non-conference rivalries that are set for each year. So like Oklahoma and Texas are in a different division, South Carolina and Clemson are in different divisions, Notre Dame and USC are in different conferences, etc. I mean, for the most part, we will try to play new teams in each of the 3 new non-conference games, but we want to keep the tradition alive in college football. So let's talk playoff. And I've gone back and forth on this, but I think that the 12-team setup is the best setup. 12 teams with conference championship games. The conference champions all get a first-round bye. So you have 4 conference champions in the 4 conferences, all with the first-round bye. And you get wild card teams or losers from the conference championships into the playoff. Now, obviously, losers in the conference championship games do get a little bit screwed by this, but I think it's better than the 16-team setup, which gives you no first-round byes, and you could have a setup where Alabama is playing Oklahoma in the first round as a 1-16 matchup. That does not reward Alabama for winning the Southern Conference and Oklahoma being 3rd or 4th in the West, whatever it took for them to get to that. Oklahoma is still a tough matchup for Alabama, and just a home game doesn't override that real tough matchup. You could go 14 teams, but 14 teams only gives you 2 first-round byes. And it's still weird. I don't know exactly how you set up a 14-team bracket where it goes all one way. So we're going to stick with the 12-team bracket because it works the best with the 4 conferences. And we're just going to deal with whatever comes from that. Now let's look at how teams qualify for the playoffs because it's supposed to be evened out with this more even setup. For playoff seeding, we're just going to go wins and losses. For the most part, if they're interconference, they're going to have played each other, so head-to-head will be the tiebreaker in any tie-up scenario. But if we do see a non-conference matchup that would be a tie that they didn't play each other, then we're just going to say, what was the West record versus the South in the case of Oklahoma or Ole Miss that are both tied at 8-4 to get in the 12th spot? Or even when you're looking at seeds, what was the West record against the South? And if it's even or like 3-3 or whatever it would be, then we're going to start to look at like stats like points for, points against, things like that. But that's really not super important to the setup, being that everybody is going to be playing the top 40 teams. Every game will be against a top 40 team. So we're not going to have the differences that we saw with like Indiana and the SEC teams that didn't make it in. Indiana was 11-1, but they didn't play even the top teams in the Big Ten. They played the bottom of the Big Ten. So you won't have that set up with only 10-team conferences, 9 conference games. And I think it will overall be more even if they did go with this setup. But let me know what you think with all these teams. Is there teams that I left out? I'm going to say this is scientific. I didn't have a preconceived... I mean, I had some preconceived notions of who would be in it, but I think this is the most scientific way to say these teams are important. People like these teams. These teams will be viewed if we have to shrink it down. And if for even 40 teams seems like a huge shrink down. I mean, it's less than a third of what we're currently watching. But if we had to shrink it down to the top division of college football, I think that these teams would make it in. Let me know what you think. What scientifically did I get wrong here? Other than that, thanks for watching this video. Make sure that you like and subscribe. And if you've made it this far, leave a comment. Let me know what you think. I always try to comment back, so make sure you let me know what you think. If you want to watch more of my videos, I do have those for you. They're actually on this side here. I have my college football March Madness, which I worked hard on. Still hasn't gotten a lot of views, but check that out, especially leading up to the Final Four. When you watch this, the Final Four will be started, so check that out there. Up here, I've got my most popular video that I've done recently, which is the True Power 5. It's a similar conference realignment video that I had here, so check that out as well. Other than that, I've got my subscribe link on this side, and we will check you next time. See ya!